Hi everyone, welcome back to the Clip-Clop show. I'm Laurel.
I'm Dillon.
And we always like to clean our tack while we're making these podcasts. Right now I'm just cleaning my tall boots and just gonna, you gotta do that as often as you can because they get nasty really quickly. So I'm gonna be doing that. So we encourage you guys to, grab your boots, your belt, your bridle, saddle, whatever you have, and clean with us. And today we are going to talk about motivation and keeping your motivation and setting yourself up for success. And this one is going to be a little more open format than the last couple of ones. So I just want to open, I guess, with this one thing that the most frequent that a lesson student who doesn't own their own horse usually rides their horse or rides a horse is going to be once a week, and it's probably 30-minute lesson, maybe an hour, so average 45 minutes. So if you ride a horse once a week for 45 minutes, in a year that's 39 hours, which is less than one full day of working full-time of 40 hours.
Wait, how often is it's less than one day?
It's less, so it's 39 hours is the total in 1 year. Versus if you ride 5 days a week, maybe on your own horse, maybe not, but if you ride 5 days a week for that same amount of time of 45 minutes, that is 195 hours. So it's just the comparison of, it's not that you can't do what someone who owns their own horse or rides a lot more often can do. It's just going to take more time. And that's something that people don't realize is they want to get really good at something, but they have to put in the time. And I'm not saying that, that means go get a horse if you aren't financially, there, or if you don't know much about taking care of horses. And I'm not saying that, taking once a week lessons is a bad thing. That's how we all start, or that's at least how I started and how Dillon is starting. But it's just an interesting thing to think about. And it's easy sometimes to slip into like, I have this goal, but it's okay if I ride 3 days a week, or if it's okay if I ride 2 days a week because I'm just so busy. But it really is important, I think, to think about the hours behind that.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you say 39 hours in a year, like that doesn't seem...
That's wild, right?
It doesn't seem like a lot, just hearing you say it like that. I don't mean to discount the efforts of people that are, dedicating themselves to this as much as they can.
Right.
But 39 hours is that's less than 2 full days.
Yeah.
So, in the grand scheme of things that, I don't know, I guess a lot of the educational process takes place off of the horse and doing independent learning. I mean, at least some component of it. Mm-hmm. But still, even a generous, maybe a generous figure might be in the 100 to 200 hours a year total. Yeah. And that just doesn't seem like a lot, overall. Because, I mean, how much are we working in a week? And then extrapolating that to a year, it's 40 times 52? So, I'm not going to try to do quick mental math here, but are we talking 1,000 hours? How many is that?
40 times 52?
Yeah, so...
40 times 52 is 2,080.
Yeah, goodness. Okay, I'm a little bit far off. But, in our work, we're putting in 2,080 hours, and then 32, in a primary hobby. Mm-hmm. I understand that not everybody has, unlimited free time, but that doesn't seem like a lot. I feel like you can do more than that.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about horse riding is it is one of the most expensive sports. But something we're going to talk a lot about today is how to really maximize your, what you're getting out of both your lessons and just riding in general. Because no matter how much access you have, you can be more committed than someone who has, just a massive amount of access. Someone who rides a horse once a week in a lesson can be more committed than someone who owns their own horses and rides 10 horses a day, you know, and you may not reach your goals as quickly, but, you know, that person, if they're feeling tired, they may not get up early and go ride. If they have an engagement with their friends, they might not go ride with their horses. If they, I don't know, if they lose their motivation, they may just put off riding for a few days or months even. So it is possible to be more committed than someone that has more access. And I think that's more important. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on that, and, you know, going into details on how to optimize and how to maximize, you know, the amount of time that people do have. But just my initial assumption is that, you know, just the sheer quantity of hours that you can put in if you're like fully dedicated to it. So say someone who, and not to question people's dedication, but I'm saying if you're putting in hundreds of hours in a year, mm-hmm. which, you know, whatever's safe for your horse, or, you know, safe for their, you know, just making sure their back doesn't get messed up or anything like that.
Sure.
You know, it seems that just the hours on the horse is going to be much more valuable than even the most like optimal use of 39 hours in a year.
It totally will. And I'm not saying that at the end of the year you're going to be at a higher standpoint than someone that owns their own horses, but you're probably not always going to be where you are right now. So if you are able to build that discipline, you know, motivation and discipline are different. Motivation comes and goes with how you're feeling that day. You know, some days I don't feel motivated. I'm not inspired, so I don't go ride. Well, if you're not motivated and not inspired for, I don't know, a month out of the year, you know, 30 days out of the entire year, that's 1 month across the whole year, then that's a whole month you could have been riding. So if you're at the spot right now where you have these great riding goals, but you're just riding once a week, then, and you're building that discipline of, you know, even if I'm not feeling it, even if I'm not motivated, I'm going to do this because I have these goals. What a great mindset to set for yourself, because in the future, you know, you might be able to afford more lessons per week, or you might be able to even afford your own horse one day, hopefully. And if you've already set that mindset of that hard work and doing it no matter what, then you will be further than your peers at that point. And the point is really you don't need to compare your goals with, at the end of the year, with the goals at the end of the year of someone who has more access. But overall, I think that you can achieve more if you just have that dedication, you know, because another thing about dedication is riding, like we said, is not just done on the horse. You know, there's so much you can do in between your riding. 45 minutes in a day is not that much, you know, when you're thinking about the whole day. But if, you know, even if you're riding 5 days a week. But if the rest of that time you're doing mental rehearsal of what you did in your last ride and what you want to do in the future ride, and you are, you know, you've gotten just a cheap tripod and you're filming yourself every ride and looking at your riding and saying, I'm noticing this and I'm struggling with this, and then you go and look up a video, you know, of a top rider doing that same thing. Like, say you're struggling with your canter and you look up a video of Charlotte Dujardin cantering and you just put it on 0.25 times speed and you watch it and you study it, you know, and that's going to inform yourself on your own riding. That's stuff that a lot of people aren't doing, you know, and there have been studies that have shown that, actually the first time I heard of this was in relation to video games, that people will watch Let's Play video games on YouTube because they get the same experience in their brain gets the same experience as if they played it themselves. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of that before?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is something I mentioned in passing over the past week. I think it was, there was a recent statistic that, you know, keeping on the video game topic, that Gen Z plays, you know, doesn't play as many video games as millennials did. And
is that because they're watching videos?
well, so the explanation that I've seen based on analysis of this information is that a lot of what millennials do is they'll engage in a different way. They don't do the playing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They basically watch through Twitch. They watch through influencers that they follow, and it's sort of living vicariously through the creator.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a different way of consuming the content.
Yeah. Well, I just thought it was interesting that in your brain it's the same thing.
Mm.
And that also applies to, anything that you do. So mental rehearsal is just basically just imagining it.
Mm-hmm.
And imagining yourself riding and imagining this very specific things. Like if I'm trying to leg yield my horse, I'm going to see myself on my horse with the view that I would have from my horse and feel in my hands and my legs how I'm pushing and directing and, asking him for bend and for movement. And, where am I going to be looking? What am I going to do if he drops his shoulder to the outside? Meaning if he just kind of juts out with his shoulder instead of moving sideways in a straight line. What am I going to do in these certain circumstances that may arise? How will I straighten myself once I get back onto the rail and go forward?
Mm-hmm. I see what you're saying, and I certainly see the value in that. Although I do want to push back on 2 points, specifically with respect to it, to the benefit of sort of envisioning this training regimen. So, first off, there's the muscle memory that you're building while you're actually doing the exercise. You're not building these muscles when you're doing it mentally.
Very true.
So while I totally see the benefit of rehearsing these things, mentally, psychologically, you're missing out on the muscle memory that you would be gaining. But the second one, and arguably maybe more important, is the horse is not being trained.
Yeah, I mean, and that's true, but you can only do what you can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I only have access to this, I'm going to maximize that by doing this mental rehearsal.
And what you're saying is that if someone who is optimizing in that way, so say one person has 1 hour on the horse a week versus another person that has 2, if that person is making use of their downtime in an optimal manner, they might actually come out ahead of the person who has 2 hours a week.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And I'm not saying that if you have 1 hour a week and someone else has 10 or 15, that you're going to come out ahead of them.
That's going to be hard. Yeah.
But it's still important to be committed.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And to have that discipline to do that stuff. Because, and while you're right that the horse isn't being trained, I'm not saying do this instead of riding your horse.
Mm-hmm.
You can only ride a horse, once a day at the maximum. Really, 6 times a week should be the maximum.
That's something I want to drill deeper into and discuss.
Yeah.
So I guess earlier you mentioned the 45-minute figure. Is that sort of a hard and fast limit for the amount of training that a horse can do in a day? What is the limit?
No, it's actually kind of interesting. Different places do different things. I know that in Italy, and I don't know if this is one riding school that I heard about or if this is common practice in Italy specifically, but at least a riding school in Italy, they do, I think, 2 or 3 rides a day for horses, but they're only like 10 or 15 minutes long. And learning theory with horses suggests that their learning capacity is maximized at 10 to 15 minutes. So, and this is something I was thinking about for other horses too, long format versus short format learning. And, even without the 15 minutes, if we're just taking short format as a regular 30 minutes, and long format as this horse is used to working all day out on the range, herding cows, that really does bring in a preference for horses. I think horses do have a preference for how long they want to work. My friend has a horse that used to be a ranch horse, you know her, and she wants to do barrels with him, and she's had. I feel like in his mind, work is short spurts across a long period of time, instead of in a short period of time, one big spurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I feel like people are kind of that way too, Like some people want to work in short spurts throughout the day, and some people just get like a wild hair and they just gotta like work all at once and work like vigorously and then they're done. Like I kind of get that way with cleaning. you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But as far as like for horses, what's generally how long you should ride a horse, about 45 minutes is accepted. But again, it depends on the level of work.
Per day, though.
Per day. And, you really should have at least 1 day off. Pretzel gets at least 2 days off.
Okay, so that I do want to sort of walk back my earlier statements, at least slightly, sort of temper them a little bit. So when we're talking about just one order of magnitude difference between, like the least optimal and the most optimal, that really does emphasize the importance of the out of the arena training,
right.
The mental training.
Right.
Because, on the lower end, we're talking, what did you say, 39 hours?
Mm-hmm.
And on the upper end, if we're talking, 1 hour a day, let's just use a nice round number, that's 365 hours.
Yeah.
So that's an order of magnitude difference. But so at worst, we're getting 1/10 of the performance. At best, we're getting the full performance.
Right.
So really, that's not a lot of difference.
Right.
So it seems like it's pretty level just based on the limitations of the horse itself.
Yeah.
So that does change things,
It does. It does. And I'm not saying like compare yourself to someone who has this much access, but when that person becomes your peer, you're going to have that same motivation that you had when you only rode once a week, but you're still going to be studying, you're still going to be, reading books, you're still going to be watching videos. And I personally have found watching videos on YouTube at 0.25 times speed, especially for dressage, but I can see it for jumping and stuff too, just so you can see every cue, you can see what the horse does, and then how the rider corrects that and moves forward, and you can see, every cue that the horse is being given. That really is informative. You can see how the rider moves with the horse, and even if you're not doing, even if you're watching Charlotte Dujardin and you're not doing half passes and canter pirouettes and piaffe, which are high level dressage moves, you can still get a lot of information from how she sits the walk, how she transitions from trot to canter, how she, looks around a turn, that kind of stuff. Even if it's your first lesson, watching someone ride, and this could even be great for before your first lesson, watching a great rider ride and imagining your body and maybe even physically sitting in a chair and doing those same movements in front of a mirror and watching yourself and comparing yourself to that. And the great thing about riding is there's not a limit of once you reach this age, you stop riding. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because a lot of sports are that way. Like, once you get to past, 16 or whatever, you can't really go to the Olympics in gymnastics.
What is that like? Yeah, exactly. That's, it's pretty rough, bleak outlook for that. But you're talking about a lifetime hobby, so...
Yeah. But there are 60, 70-year-old athletes that do, Grand Prix show jumping and dressage and compete in the Olympics. So no matter what age you are, it's never too late to start. And at the stables where I work, probably half of our students are adults, and a very large percentage of those, it's their first experience with riding. They haven't done it before. And so it's never too late to start riding. And I feel like that's something that people do think about, because there is that trope of the horse girl and, just a little girl, and little girls love horses. And I do think that puts off men and it puts off adults, into thinking this probably isn't for me. This is for kids. This is for little girls. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, no, I get that. That is one of those funny things of how did that happen? Yeah. Because if we go back to the 60s, 50s movies, it was, the spaghetti Western was the big thing at that time. Yeah. And that was all about the masculinity of riding a horse and how that was the cool thing to do, cowboys, Indians. Yeah. That was sort of the fun thing being explored at that time. But now the whole paradigm has shifted, and now it's, like you said, it's very female dominated, the interaction with horses. It is. Now, what would be interesting for me to see is back then in the equestrian sports, was that same, gender split? Was that same split there?
I don't think so. I think, until the side saddle was invented, which people think of it as like this, like, oh, women were forced to wear skirts and ride in a side saddle. No, that was like a huge step forward in women's freedom. They're now able to ride horses, and they're able to have all this extra freedom that they never had before, and do this new thing that they never could before the side saddle was invented. But before that, it was just men riding, because women can't spread their legs. Are you crazy?
Yeah.
And but nowadays, yeah, it's completely different. It's the only Olympic sport that is accessible to both male and female athletes, that is female dominated. And it's the only one where men and women compete on the same thing. I think even like the bobsledding ones, maybe not, but I think they're split into men's and women's, which is just interesting. But
yeah, I won't pretend to know exactly, but that it is an interesting dynamic. And I guess getting back to the more fundamental point is, like you said, there's that archetype of the horse girl, and she's getting all this experience, and people can probably see an issue there if you're not getting that young experience. If you're not, and this can be applied to anything really. I don't think it needs to be specifically with equestrian sports.
Yeah,
it's very discouraging to see all these people that got started young and are reaching these heights, and then you can obviously feel like you'll never get to that point. And that's a scary thing.
Yeah,
and one thing I'll say that I would need to look into for myself is, yes, you have older people in the sports, and you can start at 40, and you've got all the way until you're 70. That's 30 years that's 3 whole decades of experience and of enjoying a hobby. And just think about what you could achieve in that time. But the one thing I'm not sure about is, and this has sort of been echoed in other hobbies that I've sort of looked at and been a part of, brain elasticity. Can the brain take in that information? Can it build those habits in the same way at an older age, starting later?
Yeah, there's actually lots of like senior therapy programs using horses. It's just a great way to reconnect your mind to your body and relearn how to use those muscles. And especially even if you're a fit person, learning how to use muscles that you probably haven't used before. Equestrian riding is a very unique sport. There's muscles that you use that you really don't use that often in anything else. Like your hip flexors. When do you use your hip flexor muscles?
I don't even know what that is.
It's the muscle that you use when you lift your leg up really high at the knee.
Okay.
It's right inside of your pelvis, and it goes from, I think, the front of your pelvis on the inside to underneath to your hip.
Okay.
And that's what that is used. You use your hip flexors in canter a lot. That keeps you in the saddle. And all other kinds of things that you just don't use otherwise. And
this applies to the brain as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not a brain expert, but I know from my mom's work that she used to do, that they used to work with seniors and build that elasticity back. And they tested it and stuff and proved that it did, you can do that. It's just about that mental rehearsal, being really, doing it tenaciously, not just doing it. Really giving yourself a hard time about it, kind of. Yeah. And doing it vigorously. Okay. Vigorous learning is different from comfortable learning. And vigorous learning is where you really learn.
Okay, so presumably getting outside of that comfort zone, exposing yourself to new discomforts, exposing yourself to new challenges, that's what's going to keep the mind sharp. That's what's going to keep the mind sort of like a well-oiled machine. Yeah. And that is something I probably will look up in my own time and bring back next week to talk about.
And again, I'm not a brain expert.
Well, yeah, but it's something interesting to explore.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that everyone's goal in riding has to be, I'm going to compete in the Olympics. It can be, I'm going to trot, you know. It can be, I'm going to canter. It can be, I'm going to gallop outside. It can be, I'm going to jump. Yeah. It doesn't matter what it is. As long as you are committed to that and you do that mental rehearsal and you do like literally everything you can to meet that goal, it will happen one day. And that's why another thing I was going to say is I saw something today on Instagram, actually, that said, don't call it a goal, call it a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was so nice because it really should be a plan. If it's just a goal or a dream, then it can be more nebulous. You know, if it's a plan, that means you might not have a date, but you at least have steps. And as you learn more, those steps can become more in depth.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, even from the beginning, how important it is to not only your motivation, but your discipline, your ability to clearly see your goal and yourself doing that goal and meeting that goal. I would say it's really important to write out each step of the way. This is what I'm going to do first. This is what I'm going to do next. This is what I'm going to do next, all the way to your goal. Mm-hmm. And it might just be like, I'm going to ride Pre-St. George. I'm going to ride Intermediate 1. I'm going to ride Intermediate 2. I'm going to ride Grand Prix. You may not know any of the steps in between that. Mm-hmm. But once you know more, you can fill in those steps in between.
Yeah, no, I see the validity in that. The way that you frame it psychologically, the way that you sort of, just mentally contextualize the goal. There it is, the word goal. But, you can totally change the way you pursue that just based on the way that you frame it in your mind.
Yeah.
I totally get that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I think there's also, when you talk about it as a plan, when you're talking about it socially, you're now creating that social pressure for yourself. Mm. So when you speak about it as a goal, people are like, oh yeah, that's great if that happens, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah.
But with a plan, it's like, okay, well, this person is sort of staking at least a little bit of their social reputation on the idea of this coming true. Right. So there's a little bit more of that pressure. And, there's bad pressure and there's good pressure, but it could be a good positive thing for maintaining that motivation, like you're saying.
It could be. Like if you're telling people my plan is to do this, then they're going to be like, hey, have you done it yet? And kind of give you that extra motivation.
Exactly. There's externally more expectations from people.
Yeah.
With a plan versus a goal.
Yeah.
If I say that it's my goal to lose 20 pounds, it's different than my plan is to lose 20 pounds. Yeah. My plan implies, like you said, there are those steps and it is imminently achievable.
Right. Right. And I would say it really depends on the person, whether or not you want to do that and present your goal to other people, because I feel like it can equally be unmotivating. Mm-hmm. If people are like, have you done that yet? And you're like, no. I mean, I guess it really depends. Maybe it would be better to tell people and to have that accountability, but maybe you just want to be accountable with yourself and you feel comfortable in what you're doing and you feel comfortable that you are doing enough and that you are working towards your goal. I think that depends, but I think that also brings up another point, that it's okay to set high goals. People always say, don't set your goals too high because you don't want to disappoint yourself. But I think if you are able, like I am, my goal, my plan is to ride Grand Prix. And if I can be so bold, my plan is to ride Grand Prix International. Mm-hmm. But I'm the kind of person that looks at every ride and says, wow, today's ride was so great. It was so much better, not maybe so much better, but I did things better than I did last time because I've done so much work in between, even just in a 24-hour period. I've done mental rehearsal. I've researched, other riders, and I'm improving every ride. And it may not be every ride. It may be every month. Wow, this month was so much better than last month. Look how far I've come. Mm-hmm. And if you're not able to do that, then maybe it's not. Maybe you should break your goals down into micro goals, micro plans. Yeah.
Just hearing you talk about the sort of thinking of things in terms of the end result, I'll just say, at the risk of sounding like a pessimist, that it does not work for me. Because and I actually have some science to back this up. It's not recent, but I do remember reading an article about this in the most in the past 3 years, something like that. But it's when you think of things in terms of the end result and you sort of visualize that end result, your mind is given some of the positive neurotransmitters, some of that serotonin, some of that some of those endorphins that you'd be
the same thing as mental rehearsal.
Yeah,
as though you had already done it.
Sort of, But whereas mental rehearsal, goodness, what am I saying? But with mental rehearsal, you're getting that benefit because you're actually doing some kind of mental training. But when you're looking at the end goal in your mind and you're experiencing it, you're getting that, you're getting those positive feelings. You're getting all of that stuff that you'd be getting from actually doing it. And, the hypothesis when they were studying this is that when you're getting, those positive results mentally, psychologically, even to your endocrine system, it's reacting in such a way.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that you're getting those positive things, then it's not as important to actually do those things.
Well, maybe then it's setting high goals is okay, but just don't visualize yourself at that stage.
Potentially. And that's going to depend on, the individual and how, I guess it's going to depend on self-control. It's going to depend on what motivates you. But when you're constantly flooding your system with dopamine because you're imagining yourself, winning a Grand Prix, then your body is already being rewarded for winning Grand Prix.
Yeah.
And when you're already getting it, do you really need to work as hard? No, you don't.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I think it's also about being able to stay present in where you are. If you're just daydreaming about being in Grand Prix, you could be mentally rehearsing your next ride. And your next ride is more important than that, at the end of the line goal. Because your next ride is how you get to that goal.
Yeah.
And you need to really put, and I think I probably do this, put more importance on your next ride than you do on your end goal.
Oh, absolutely. And it's actually really cool that you reached that conclusion because that's where I was going next. And sort of the idea is that maybe it's not as important to emphasize the end goal. And this is one of those things where it's sort of tricking your mind in a sense. Obviously the end goal is important to us. It's as a part of base human fulfillment and sort of self-actualization. We want to keep these things in mind because it's just something to aspire to. It's a good thing to have in your mind. But a way that we can sort of fix that process psychologically, it seems to me at least, that an important thing would be, okay, well, what are these eminently achievable tasks that I can constantly be working on? I can say, I can learn this activity. This is the thing I'm going to emphasize on my next ride. And this is how much I want to improve in it. This is how long I want to do it for. And to train yourself to be satisfied with those incremental improvements. Yeah. Because I promise you, anybody who won Grand Prix is still making those incremental improvements, and they're still getting that satisfaction from the process. Or else you drive yourself insane if you weren't emphasizing the importance of each little step. You got to have that positive feedback.
You do.
So you're getting to the same place, but the way you contextualize it mentally is gonna it's gonna alter the way your enjoyment of the process at least.
Totally. I think a lot of people don't know how to be gracious with themselves and treat themselves with dignity. And instead, they think that their goal is perfection when your goal should be learning. And your goal shouldn't be, my next ride will be perfect. It should be, my next ride will be in some increment better than my last ride. And if you're looking at yourself as, if you're wanting to be perfect for your next ride, you're not going to be. No one has had a 100% in Grand Prix. There's never been a Grand Prix dressage test that has gotten 100%. The highest is Vallegro, and I think it was 94, maybe, which is astronomically high. But it's not perfect, So how dare you expect perfection of yourself when you are not Charlotte Dujardin riding Vallegro? Even close. No one is. And so just being able to have that grace with yourself and treat yourself with dignity is going to keep you from disappointing yourself when you don't meet that perfect goal. Because you won't. And that's okay. And that's what I love about dressage. It's striving for perfection, but it's striving. It's not... It's a never ending attempt to reach it. But you're not disappointed with yourself when you can't, because you know that it's not possible.
Well, yeah. That's actually a beautiful thing, because like when you know perfection is achievable, there's two problems. First off, someone's already done it.
Yeah.
So think about it so let's think about mountain climbing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, after Reinhold Messner, I think he was the first one to climb Everest. After he did it, you know, you can never become the first person to climb Everest again.
Yeah.
It's been done. So with dressage, you don't have to worry about, you know, the 100 hasn't been achieved. You know, you're not always going to be, you're not always going to be dwarfed by that great achievement, you know? And you might be dwarfed by the 94%.
Yeah.
You know, you might feel that way psychologically, but no one's perfected it yet. You know, there's always that thing to strive towards.
Yeah.
And then second off, it's, you know, it's just giving yourself a break. You don't need to be perfect because no one is perfect.
Right.
And I think that's something that should be emphasized in all areas of life. But, you know, the fact that it's not an absolute thing, it's not you either did it or you didn't do it, that's a beautiful thing. And I think that can apply to any area where that's the case. And that's a lot of hobbies, actually. So it's surprisingly, and, you know, it's a great thing that that's a very general thing that can be applied in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think we should take that and be grateful for that.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to, you know, every day you're getting better.
Right.
And as long as you're getting better, that's something to be proud of.
Right.
You know, it's not just, every day is not a failure if you didn't, you know, achieve the 100%.
Mm-hmm. And if you're not, again, do that mental rehearsal, search those videos, and while you're watching them, don't think, wow, I could never do that. Wow, that person is so much better than me. Think instead, what can I learn from this? You know, I'm watching this right now. I'm taking time out of my day to watch this because I want to be a better rider, and maximize that. You know, instead of filling your brain with those negative thoughts, fill them with, oh, she did that there. Oh, I want to try that next time. Oh, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. You know, and putting yourself in a space of learning to be better, instead of just being down on yourself. Because no one ever got better from, I mean, maybe they did, but it probably took them a lot longer to get better just from being a perfectionist, you know?
Yeah.
Being a perfectionist and being down on yourself is not the same as learning.
Yeah. Well, you have to ask, even if you're deriving a lot of benefit from that strategy, what are you sacrificing?
Yeah.
You know, there's
it's
a lot of
fun.
It's not fun. And then you have to ask yourself, is that negative feedback loop going to hurt your motivation to actually get out there?
Absolutely.
I can say for myself, when I'm trying to achieve perfection, it makes starting more daunting.
Yeah.
And it makes it scary. And when something is scary, I don't want to do that something.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It's a big, you know, it's a boogeyman mentally now. It's got all these negative connotations. Mm-hmm. And that seems to me, at least, like something you want to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not to say that, like, you're going to love every ride either. Mm-hmm. You know, some rides might be really hard, and then you might not be motivated for the next one. But it's, again, having that discipline.
Yeah.
Because motivation, like I said, it comes and goes. Discipline is always there. Mm-hmm. And your motivation, you know, it is easier, like you said, if you aren't hard on yourself and you have more motivation. Because if you're hard on yourself and you were never motivated, it's just not fun. You know?
Well, and something that needs to be said as well is, as in all things, it's a balance. Mm-hmm. You know, you do have to be critical of yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you're not, it's going to take you 5 times as long as someone who's able to identify their weaknesses.
Yeah. So
keep in mind, you still need to identify weaknesses, and this isn't everything. This is surprisingly general. Mm-hmm. But being open to the idea of your weaknesses, being, you know, having a keen eye and spotting them, that's still incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Just it's about being careful not to be a perfectionist.
Yeah, there's a difference between being aware of your weaknesses and actively trying and working, you know, searching and finding those things that will help those weaknesses. There's a difference between that and, you know, viewing your weaknesses with constructive criticism than just hate.
Yeah.
You know, hating your weakness and really putting yourself down for it. That's just being over-aware. And when you're over-aware, I feel like it does inhibit you from learning how to correct that.
Yeah. Well, and it's something else important to think about is where you're assigning the blame. So when you internalize your failures and what you're doing, internalizing those failures, what it's doing is it's assigning a fault to yourself, something that's intrinsic to you, something that is a problem that you need to fix internally. So it's saying, I suck at this, I screwed up today. And when you focus on things and you sort of externalize things, and not to assign blames outside of your control, not to blame everything else, but to just say, yeah, it was a bad day. Yeah, I had a bad ride. Yeah, things didn't work. Yeah, my horse didn't cooperate today.
This is what we're doing next ride.
Exactly. It sucks, but I'm going to set an achievable goal. That's a great way to handle it. And identifying every single thing that you did wrong, I think that could be fantastic.
Absolutely.
As long as you're contextualizing correctly. Because if you're saying that I suck because of this, or I had a really bad day, or I'm not improving at the rate that I would like to be, but assigning the blame to something that is a character flaw, something that is intrinsic to you, you are making a bad move. You are going to be hurting your long-term learning because, like I said, you're not going to want to get out there. You're going to start thinking that maybe it's not for you. You're going to start thinking maybe there's a fundamental character flaw to yourself.
Right. Well, and when you start thinking of your writing and writing in that light of just that negative kind of light, suddenly all writing becomes negative. It's just not fun anymore. Makes you want to quit. You lose all motivation. So even if you do have a bad ride, just finding those spots of like, wow, that was a nice transition. And maybe that's your only good thing that ride. And then being like, wow, that was a really nice transition. Let's keep that going forward. Change these things. Here's my plan for tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. It's something something you're doing there is you're being clinical about it.
Absolutely. There's no reason to get so emotional about doing things wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, everybody does things wrong. And people say that all the time, but it's true. I mean, if you don't do things wrong, you can't learn. And it's not the pining over your quote unquote bad writing that is going to fix it. It's the studying of your quote unquote bad writing. Like when I recently have gotten back into writing, my sitting canter has been really bad. Like not good.
Yeah.
But I'm not killing myself over that. I'm taking that as an opportunity to further study how to do the canter, the biomechanics, really putting in the hours of that. And I've seen the improvements. I've experienced them. And for those of you that don't know, I was pregnant before. So after I had my our child, then I'm getting back into writing. So lots of my muscle mass is gone, and I wasn't writing for over a year, so I'm getting all that back now. But it's been really interesting to really get into that mindset, of learning, and because, I don't want to get to my goal if I'm not having fun with it.
Yeah.
The only reason I'm doing it is because I enjoy it.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no reason to do it. What's the reason to do it otherwise?
Yeah.
It's not making money.
Yeah. Definitely not, no. Well, and something you touched on a little bit before is incredibly important. It's sort of the mental framing of when we mess up. The mental framing of when we do something wrong. So when you're writing and you find out, oh wow, I did this really badly. I'm watching this video and what the heck am I doing there? That's not coming out right. It's not what was intended. Every time that happens, it is a blessing. So in the product development world, every time you find a bug, every time you find an issue with what you're working on before it gets shipped out to customers, you are
it's like a fist pump.
You're fist pumping everybody in the office. Not fist bumping everybody. But yeah, everybody's. You tend to be very happy when you can catch a flaw, before it goes to market. So when you can catch a flaw with your writing before you compete, that should be something worth celebrating.
That's a great point. Yeah. I mean, if you catch it and that gives you an extra 4%, 4%, that's a lot.
Yeah.
In dressage competition, I guess it makes sense this way. Higher percent means, better.
Yeah.
It's actually opposite in eventing. So
Interesting.
Eventing, your score is based off of your dressage score, and then the cross country and show jumping rounds can lower that. Well, actually raise that. So the lower the score is better. I don't know why it's that way, but it is. So like a 30 is a really good score in eventing, but a 30 is not a good score in dressage. So that's kind of interesting. But here we're just talking about dressage specifically. But yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, and something that I do like about dressage competition is in the competition, you're given feedback by the judges. So if you're not winning, that's okay. You know, it's an opportunity to learn from several probably really well-experienced people at one time. And that's what you're paying for. You know, you're not paying for the 2-cent blue ribbon.
That's a good way to put it. I didn't even think about it like that. Yeah, the judging and the feedback, it's got to be worth more than the actual reward.
Yeah.
As long as you're thinking in terms of like, I'm going to use this as a catapult to the next thing.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and, you know, it's taking everything as a learning experience.
Yeah.
You know, and just like you said, and I was going to actually mention this, riding every ride like it's a test, you know? Trying to catch those mistakes as they happen, and instead of like getting upset about them, you know, as they're happening, be aware and present in your riding. Know what you're doing. And you feel your horse getting off balance, correct that, move on. You feel your horse jutting out through its shoulder, correct that, move on.
Yeah.
You know, if you allow things to slide in your everyday, you're allowing things to slide in competition. You know, and it's not being overly critical about things. It's just being like, this is what I'm noticing in this moment that could be improved. That's how you're going to get that extra 4%.
But in a clinical way.
Absolutely.
You know? It's not the emotional, I suck, not the emotional, I can't get it right, I can't do this.
Yeah.
It's okay, this is what's wrong. You know, maybe even as granular as we're off this many degrees or whatever, you know, like.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you said, it's just, it's a detached, unemotional observation of what's going wrong and then working to fix that.
Yeah. And, you know, if you don't fix it in your ride, that's your opportunity to go out and research after your ride. You know, who's had the same difficulty? How did they fix it? And, you know, in your ride, you know, that's an opportunity to try things out and see what works. You know, most people, you're not going to have every ride be with your trainer. And, you know, so that's an opportunity to figure out your own horse, figure out your own body. And maybe you just aren't understanding what your trainer says. And then you finally get it because you're trying different things and seeing what actually works. So I do think it's really important to, in your ride specifically, to be present and aware. I feel like a lot of times, and you probably haven't experienced this, but when you're riding, it's really easy to get into, all right, walk, trot, canter. You kind of zone out like you do when you're driving. And, you know, circles, serpentine, all right, cool down, walk, and we're done. But instead, being aware of what you're doing, aware of how your body is, aware of what muscles you're squeezing, aware of where you're putting your legs and how, you know, far apart your hands are, how tightly you're holding the reins. This is a big one, where you're looking. And this is a big one for me specifically because I tend to look down, not totally down, but kind of down into the center. I think it's just so important to try and know what it is that you're doing. And the more aware you are of that, the more time, you know, the more practice you put into being aware of what you're doing and being really present in the moment, the better you're going to get at that, and the more you're going to notice.
Okay, interesting. And that kind of ties back to where we started. We started talking about the amount of hours that you're putting in and how you're using that time effectively. So I guess being uneducated in this, I sort of want to run this by you. But would it be the case that, you know, when you're taking advantage of that 1 hour, you want to make the best of it in the sense of you're getting constant footage, you're going over that footage, you're understanding it, you're seeing what you're doing wrong, you're constantly iterating. It seems like the iterating is the important part. It's making those mistakes, catching them fast, and then correcting them quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the best way to do that is to capture footage of yourself, it seems, and to constantly realize what you're doing wrong. Because if you're not seeing what you look like from a third-person perspective, you're making mistakes that you're not seeing.
Because that's how you view great riders, is from a third-person perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're not in their body feeling what they're doing.
Yeah.
So being able to, even if you have a mirror in your arena, that's not going to show you yourself 100% of the time.
That's a great point. You don't know what it feels like to do it right.
Right.
You know, you're not the one, when you're watching that YouTube video, you're not getting like the muscle feedback. You're not getting everything. You're not even seeing what it looks like from their perspective.
Right.
So to really accurately gauge your progress, to accurately gauge where you stand from a skills perspective, you know, it does seem like the third person footage, like you mentioned earlier, would be important.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's, you know, you film yourself, you see yourself, oh, I did that just like, you know, this great rider. That was perfect. But also being aware in your riding, remembering when that was and what you were doing. You're
totally right. Yeah. Yeah. You have to tie the action from a third person's perspective to, you know, the feeling of how it felt. And that, maybe that's a lot of the benefit of having a trainer with you is they can call it out in the moment. And it's easier to make that like mental connection of, oh, this is what happened. They just told me that was great. I'm going to do that again. Yeah. And I know what it feels like. I know what it looks like because I just did it.
Right.
And that neural pathway is being cemented more quickly.
Yeah. Probably. It's totally, you're totally right. And I think it's probably therefore even more important to film your rides with your instructors because they're going to say, that's great. And if you can see yourself doing it and you remember yourself doing it and, you know, they're telling you that is the correct thing, then I feel like that's even more important to just have that feedback from that.
So to put a more actionable sequence like of steps on what we talked about earlier about optimizing, it seems like some steps that we have right now are to film yourself, to be constantly aware of what you're doing, you know, be very attentive, be in the moment, be present from a variety of perspectives, from a vision perspective, from a muscle feeling perspective, you know, just attentive in all these ways. And then third, if you can, get some training. And a third, get a second pair of eyes that's watching you while you're riding. It seems that would be the most optimal.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It is, yeah. And one other thing I'll add is planning out your ride. I usually plan mine, but last week, and I told you about this, Pretzel and I had a ride where I didn't plan what we were going to do. And it wasn't a bad ride. You know, we still had things that we did well, but it was not nearly as organized. We didn't progress nearly as much as we usually do. And it just wasn't as, I don't know, it just wasn't up to how our rides usually are, which is fine. It made me realize, oh, I do better if I plan my rides. And I would say probably most people do. Even if it's just the night before, you're like, okay, this is my warm-up, this is my work section, and that's what I'm going to do. You know, memorize it, take a picture of it on your phone if you need to, so you can pull it out while you're riding and be like, oh, what was I going to do next? And I found that super helpful for me because especially when you're riding, it can be hard to know what to do next. You know, you can do exactly what you did in your last lesson, but a lot of the times you improve between lessons. And that's where the research comes in. You research, oh, I really want to try this exercise. So we're going to incorporate that into our next ride. And, you know, we really need to work on this specifically. I'm just not comfortable with where we are right now. All right, look up some exercises, do them, see how they work. And it's just really been beneficial for me, planning out every ride. And then you're also, because you've written it down, you're also seeing your progress. You know, a month ago, wow, I was only doing this a month ago. Well, now I'm doing this in my rides. And you're being able to see that progress as it comes. So.
Yes, so that's tying into. So we've tied the first point into the second point a little bit because now we're talking about how these, you know, seeing these positive results and being attentive, having this plan, that's actually going to feed into your motivation. Yeah. So it's sort of this self-sustaining process. This what is the opposite of a vicious cycle? A beneficial cycle of development that you're getting here. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I would say like. My average day riding, I wake up really early, I go ride, then, you know, I film myself riding, I'm aware while I'm riding, I know what I'm doing, and I'm trying to lock that away in my memory, exactly what I'm doing in the moment. And then after my ride, I rewatch my ride. I pick apart, little things like, oh, I remembered, I didn't like this transition, or this line wasn't very good. Or it felt like he was really good here. I wonder what that looks like. And being able to, just go back and look at that. I'll rewatch it, and then I'll find a couple things I want to work on. I'll research those things. I'll watch videos. I'll listen to, podcasts. I'll look up exercises. I'll read the USDF, which is the United States Dressage. I don't know if it's Federation or Foundation. It's got to be Federation.
That sounds
because Foundation's like a charity. Yeah, I think it's Federation. Anyway, they have several manuals. They have how to train dressage. They have a how to lunge manual. They have all kinds of really cool manuals. But looking those up and being like, okay, these are the cues for this. And just using every single tool I can think of to work on those specific things. Then that night, I'll make a riding plan. My warm-up is pretty much always the same, but I'll make a plan for my riding. And, what am I going to do at the walk? What am I going to do at the trot? What am I going to do in my walk breaks between, trot and canter? And just, getting all of that together. And then I'll mentally rehearse that night, kind of try it while I'm memorizing that. I'm going to mentally rehearse the whole thing. You don't have to do it in real time, but you can do it, kind of sped up and I'm sure doing it in real time is probably beneficial too. I don't know, but, just mentally rehearse. You get up that morning on your, next morning on your drive there, mentally rehearse it again. And it's just about putting in the hours. And, and like we started out saying, the hours does not just mean the hours riding.
Yeah.
It's the hours overall.
Well, yeah, because in all things, you can brute force an issue, and you're going to make progress no matter what. You're going to be closer to your final goal, than you started. But there are certain things that we've talked about here, certain things you can do generally. They're going to be force multipliers. They're going to put you there quicker. They're going to put someone who has 1 hour on the same par or on the same level as someone who has 4 hours. And I'm just making up numbers here, but in other areas, that's certainly a valid force multiplier to what you're doing.
Yeah.
You can totally expect something like that.
Totally.
But I guess I'm interested, is that something realistic for writing?
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely is. And the great thing about writing is it doesn't need to be about the time it takes to get there. If you think about it, there really is no pressure on how long it takes you to get there. But you should pressure yourself on, am I trying my hardest? And if you are, that's great. And if your hardest is just, what am I trying to say? I guess I'm trying to say, if your hardest isn't where you are wanting to be at the moment, being able to have your grace with yourself and saying, it's okay, I'm trying my best. I really am. Being honest with yourself, I really am trying my best. So I'll get there. And just, you don't need to be completely relaxed about it, but being able to have that grace with yourself and have, give that relaxation to yourself a bit is going to make it more fun and it's going to make you want to keep that forever. Because like we said at the beginning, if you are easier on yourself and taking things as a learning opportunity and you ride once a week, you are going to end up in a better place than someone who rides 10 horses every day, but is so hard on themselves that they lose all their motivation.
Yeah.
You're gonna end up at a better place.
Yeah, and it's funny because when it comes to at the beginning of the year, I'll set a reading goal for myself. I'll say I'm going to read 20 pages a day, and I'll keep that up for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I get to the day where I get to 10 pages, and I'm really hard on myself. I say, "Dang it, I blew it," and I might stop there. It might take me another month to start reading again. But the fact that I was hard on myself and the fact that I handled it in a maladaptive way, I I blew up, I completely stopped my progress. And it goes back to that famous thing of, you underestimate what you can do in the long term. You overestimate what you can do in the short term. 20 pages, it's not a lot in a day. And that 10 pages that I missed in that day, it really wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
But I blew up the importance of it,
Yeah, if you're of the mindset that, well, I didn't meet my goal, so I might as well stop.
You've done something very wrong.
Your mentality is not right for what you're doing.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so you just focus on the long term. Now, okay, it's funny because we said before, focus on short, small goals.
Yeah.
But, with assessing your progress and with your contentedness in what you're doing and, your general happiness with your progress, you should focus on the long term. You should say, well, I don't need, Rome was not built in a day.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between like focusing on the long term and making that, your main thing and keeping that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So
keep in mind your goal.
Exactly. But like retroactively look at your progress in terms of the long, you can think, I'm only 1 year into a 50-year career in this hobby, in this pursuit, but also say, I'm happy tomorrow if I just get a little bit better,
Absolutely.
It's that kind of thing. So it's balancing that,
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit. Yeah. Just like you said, Rome wasn't built in a day. If tomorrow I put one brick down, that is one brick closer to a finished Rome than I was yesterday.
And in 50 years, think of how many bricks you can put down. Think of the progress you can make.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. I really enjoyed your feedback on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're one of the most disciplined people I know.
Oh, well, maybe I'm just good at making it look like that. Yeah.
But yeah, so I hope this has helped some of you. And the great thing about it is I think that a lot of the stuff we've said is not just applicable to writing. If you're disciplined and you know how to be disciplined in one thing, you know how to be disciplined in another thing.
Absolutely.
And it's just about, even if your goal isn't to do anything with writing, if your goal is to be, I don't know,
the best underwater basket weaver there is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then just, I hope that we've helped you be able to kind of visualize your goals, make plans, and, treat yourself with respect and dignity that you deserve.
Absolutely. Yep. Definitely a lot of good points, and I feel like I've learned a lot today. So, yeah.
Me too. Yeah. And I hope that you all have as well. Well, we'll end that there. If any of you would like to say anything that you think benefited you, say something that you thought was a terrible idea, or just say hi, you can reach us on our Instagram at the Clip-Clop Show, or you can email us at theclipclopshow@gmail.com. You can also follow our horse, Pretzel, and see what he gets up to at Horse Named Pretzel on Instagram. We both ride him, and we post a lot on there as well. So we'd love to see you guys here next week. And until then, have a great time riding, set good goals, and just be easy on yourself, dang it.
Yep, absolutely. I completely agree.
All right, see you guys later.
All right, bye, y'all.